like to welcome you to the December 15th meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to announce that our superintendent, Dr. Donna Hargens, is unable to be with us this evening. She's with her family due to the passing of her father. Our thoughts and prayers are with Dr. Hargens and her family at this time. Prior to this meeting, the board held a work session to receive an update on student assignment processes, and we will do our traditional moment of silence at the holiday season. Think of a holiday thought. Then we will have the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Ms. Haddad will read our vision statement tonight. So if you could please join me at this time for a moment of silence. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Haddad.
All JCPS students graduate prepared to reach their full potential and contribute to our society throughout life.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the November 24th meeting? Mr. Haddaway, second Ms. Haddad. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move to recognitions and resolutions. Ms. Terry Robinson.
Board Chair Diane Porter and members of the Jefferson County Board of Education. This evening, we begin with the recognition of Anna Castro, a teacher at DuPont Manual High School, for being selected as a Clays Noble Educator of Distinction. The award recognizes outstanding educators who make a positive difference in the lives of their students. The Clays Noble Educator of Distinction is a special program of the National Society of High School Scholars, which honors educators worldwide and encourages young people around the world to strive for excellence and to embrace their responsibility for world betterment as our future world leaders and innovators. Board Chair Diane Porter, please come forward and congratulate Anna. Joining in the recognition is her principal, Jerry Mays. Her husband is with us tonight to help celebrate. Would you please stand to be recognized, please? Thank you. Next, we have the honor of recognizing Michelle Lowe, teacher at Moore Traditional School, for being named the Kentucky Exceptional Child Education Teacher of the Year. Michelle has been a special education teacher in multiple disability self-contained classrooms since 2007. She is a national board certified exceptional needs specialist in early childhood through young adulthood. She serves as a mentor to those pursuing national certification and to beginning special educators. Michelle credits fate for first placing her in a classroom for individuals with special needs as a paraprofessional, where it was instantly clear that this is what she was meant to do. Board member Carol Ann Haddad, please come forward to extend congratulations to Michelle. Joining in the recognition is her principal, Vicki Letty. Michelle's family is also joining her tonight. Would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. This evening marks the last meeting of two of our board members, Board Member Carol Ann Haddad and Debbie Westland. The board and the superintendent would be remiss if we did not thank them for their service with us on the board. So we want to take this opportunity to do so. At this time, Ms. Haddad, would you please introduce your family and any special guests who have joined you this evening?
Yeah, it's my special honor to introduce my family. I've done this for 28 years, and you can't do that without the support of your family. especially when the times are really tough, and they do get tough on the school board. And I've been through a lot of them, but they have been there through everything for me. So first, I would like to introduce my husband of 55 years. He's put up with me that long, Bob Haddad. My son, Bruce Haddad. His wife, Vicki Haddad. And my grandson, Derek Haddad, who graduated from Atherton High School, and both my children graduated from Manual. And my daughter, Camille Haddad Bowling. And my son-in-law, Kevin Bowling. My grandson, Parker Bowling, who graduated from Manual. And Hunter Bowling, he's hiding back there, and you can see he can't hide very much. He graduated from Manual. And Parker now's in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. Derek is at JCTC, and Hunter is at Bellarmine, graduates of Jefferson County Public Schools. But I just can't thank them enough for all the time they've put up with me and have been there for me no matter what. I'm very fortunate to have such a wonderful family, as you can see. I've been blessed. Thank you.
Ms. Westland, would you please introduce your family?
My family here tonight is my husband, Paul Westland. Paul has, as Ms. Haddad said, you can't do this job without the support of someone, and generally it's your family. And I know in our home it's taken up a couple of rooms of our house, all the documents, and he's always been very patient and very helpful, always watches this on TV. And if you all can believe it, he even sometimes tells me I'm wrong. He gets away with it. But thank you, Paul, so much for your support, and it's meant a great deal to have you there. And my daughter Emma, who's at Indiana University, an Atherton graduate, Parker's age, went to middle school with him, and she has a final in the morning at 8 a.m. in voting and public opinion. So I think she's had a little bit of a little example of what that's like over the last 8 years, so hopefully that'll help her do well. But anyway, thank you for being here, Paul, and want to thank everybody for your support, all the board members. It's been great to work with you, and the ones who aren't here that I knew, Joe, and still know, Steve and Larry and Ms. Elmore, who always had a great summary of everything at the end of meetings. She did a great job. And Carol, I just want to say what an inspiration you've been and what a friend you've been. It's been great to work with you, and your persistence and your toughness and your caring, something I really learned from, and I know we'll be friends. So
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would,
Thank you.
I would also like to thank everybody. I've been on the board for, tell you how long, 4 commissioners of education. Before that, they were elected, and then they were chosen. 5 superintendents, 40 board members, and a lot of wonderful people in Jefferson County Public Schools I've had the honor to work with. I love working with the board members. We don't always agree, but we do work together, and Debbie, you have been an inspiration too. And I'm glad you're going to help us with with legislation, because that is your niche, and you do such a good job. But it's been wonderful working with all of you. And like I said, we don't always agree. And the schools, I just can't say enough about them. And the work that they do in the schools every single day for every kid. And it's just been wonderful over the years, all the people I've met. I couldn't begin to count those. So thank you to everybody for all your support, even when you didn't agree with me. And I understand that. So, but I have really enjoyed it. It's been a great love that I've done. And I'm going to stay involved in early childhood and work with the PTA where I started out in 1967. And I'm going to help them in the clothes closet and do whatever I can. I've had other people ask me to help. But this has been the love, and I just love it. And I know it will be successful because we have great leaders. Thank you.
On behalf of the Jefferson County Board of Education and Superintendent Donna Hargens, we would like to present board members Carol Ann Haddad and Debbie Westland with a token of our appreciation for their years of service on behalf of the students, families of Jefferson County Public School District. We were able to provide these tokens of our appreciation by the kind donations of our partners, so I want to thank publicly the 15th District PTA, the Jefferson County Association of School Administrators, and the Jefferson County Teachers Association. So at this time, Ms. Haddad and members of the Haddad family, if you would come up for a presentation and a photo. Nothing broken. So, Ms. Haddad, hold on.
Thank you all very much.
Ms. Westland, would you and your husband please join Ms. Porter for a photo and presentation?
Picks up like a football.
And we'd like to ask our Jefferson County Board of Education members to please join Ms. Porter and Ms. Westland and her husband, please. We are honored to have State Representative Jim Wayne to join us this evening with a special presentation for Ms. Haddad.
Thank you, Terry, and good evening. I wanted to take a moment to thank both Debbie Westland and Carol Haddad for your years of service. But in particular, no slight to Debbie, because we'll be continuing to work together in the legislative process. Carol is a constituent of mine, and we've known each other for over nearly a quarter of a century. And so I thought this was a special time to recognize her and to let people know how wonderful her service has been. The idea that all you board members know of running for public office is something that at the same time is both interesting and challenging, but also darn tough. Because sometimes when you're in the public arena, you get bloodied, and you get beaten up, and you get criticized, and people say things about you that are untrue. So it's important for us to recognize anyone who steps into that arena should be honored. And I know that in the case of Carol, that you have done that because you have a deep passion for children and for education, and you've done it consistently through all these years. So I'm honored to read the citation from the Kentucky House of Representatives. And on the human side, I'll tell you that my wife and I knew the last time we had a citation this long was in the last 24 years of my service, was when Ron Mazzoli was honored in November as the #1 citizen of Snitzelburg. So I had to find some place where a special frame would fit this long citation. And in the months since that happened, Debbie and I couldn't realize where we picked up that frame. And over supper tonight, we realized it was at Michael's. So I'm going to take this back when I'm finished, Carol, and I'm going to get a frame for you.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll read it for you. The House of Representatives of the Commonwealth of Kentucky hereby honors and recognizes Carol Ann Haddad for 28 years of meritorious service as a vital member of the Jefferson County Public Schools Board of Education, where she has represented the interest of the schools, students, faculty, and staff of Educational Board District Number 6. Prior to her first election to the board in 1975, Mrs. Haddad had already been serving the district for nearly a decade. She began her service in 1967 as a member of the PTA at Audubon Elementary School in our district, where she served with great distinction for 7 years, including 2 years as the PTA president. She was also a PTA member at the Camp Taylor Elementary School in our district, Knoll Middle School, and the former Durrett in our district, and DuPont Manual High Schools. She helped clean up at Audubon Elementary School following the 1974 tornado. She tutored as part of Audubon's reading programs and served as manager for her daughter's softball team. She assumed a seat on the board for the first time in 1976 and served until 1980, and then was elected again in 1990 and held her seat for the next 24 years. Over the course of her long and distinguished tenure, Mrs. Haddad served as chairwoman of the board in 1993, 1994, and from 1999 until 2004, and as vice chairwoman in 1997, 1998, 1992 and 93, 1996 and 97, 2009 and 2010, 2013 and 2014. She is credited with having expanded teacher training throughout the district and was named one of the 5 finalists for the Broad Foundation Prize for Urban Education, which I understand is one of the most prestigious things that a school district can attain, and it's a nationally recognized competition, and so it's to be one of the 5 finalists is quite impressive. Inasmuch as Carol Ann Haddad has worked diligently on behalf of the students, faculty, and staff of the Jefferson County Public School District, and has served as a vital advocate for education and for the continued enhancement of educational opportunities provided to all the youth of Jefferson County, the members of this august body are deeply honored to join Representative Jim Wayne in extending sincere commendation and gratitude for her years of exemplary service to her community and her fellow men and women, in extending to her best wishes for continued success and good fortune in all her future endeavors. Done in Frankfort, Kentucky on this 15th day of December in the year 2014, and it's signed by Speaker Greg Stumbo and by me. So Carol, we honor you, and we honor your family who supported you through all these years, Bobby and all of you.
Brad Hughes from the Kentucky School Boards Association has a special presentation for Ms. Haddad.
Board members, but before I start on Carol Haddad, I ought to, for the rest of the folks who've heard references to Debbie Westland, who will be, if she wraps up her board service doing legislative work, she'll be doing that for the Kentucky School Boards Association, and I'm one of the people that counts very happy about that. I'd also be remiss if I didn't note that at our Board of Directors meeting a couple of weeks ago, our board honored Linda Duncan for her, I believe, 6 years service on the KSB Board of Directors, representing you and all the children around the state. And we very much appreciate her efforts, as she's got a couple more months to go, and so we want to say thank you for that. Several of you were at our winter conference, and you heard, as I did, a speaker who talked about somebody in his life whose positive works had affected the lives of millions. And I would suggest to you all tonight and to your guest here that the work that Carol Haddad has done, it's not a stretch to suggest that it has affected millions of people. I moved to this community 30 years ago. There's not a day of my life that it is not improved by a Jefferson County school graduate. Could be a doctor, could be a lab tech, could be a police officer, a store manager, could be a plumber, could be a CPA. You add all that up over 30 years, and that has the potential of 10,000 good things happening in one person's life due to Jefferson County school graduates. I leave town and I've got a Jefferson County school graduate that lives on either side of me. They're watching my house, so it's still Jefferson County school graduates doing good things in my life. You take all the people in this community that have benefited from a graduate who has achieved whatever he or she has achieved because of, in no small part, the decisions and the work done by the members of the board, but especially by Carol in 28 years, I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that there's the potential for millions of people to be affected by the good works. So on behalf of the Kentucky School Boards Association, but also on behalf of the children of the state who you've been an advocate for, I'd like to say thank you and give you a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and again, thank you to Mrs. Haddad and Mrs. Westland for your service on the Jefferson County Board of Education. And at this time, is there a motion to receive the recognitions? Ms. Westland, second by Ms. Duncan. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. At this time, we have a short break to allow folks to leave if they would like to do so while we continue with our meeting. So we will break at this time just for a few minutes if you would like to leave, and then we will come back to order. Thank you.
I used to be on the lawn talking to her all the time.
Good to see you. Robert. Okay, we'll see you. We'll see you.
That's beautiful. Thank you all so much.
We're going to move on to the consent calendar and the superintendent's report. Dr. Hargins has sent some remarks that she would like for me to read for her at this time. Members of the board, Dr. Hargins asked that I say the following on her behalf. I appreciate the time that I am spending with my family. We are all incredibly grateful to have had our father in our lives. It certainly affirms the role of parents in the lives of children. I will be forever grateful for the values that my father instilled in me, my two sisters, and my brother. I regret that I am not able to be with Mrs. Haddad and Mrs. Westland to personally and publicly thank them for their leadership, support, and service. At this time, I'm to turn it over to the cabinet members who are going to give some updates.
Chair Porter, board members, at the work session, staff gave a description of the journey of improvement we have been working on over the past 3 years in student assignment. 4 major improvements have been a part of that journey. 1, incorporating the most current census data into a diversity index. 2, like moving from a paper application process to an automated process. 3, moving a manual assignment process taking countless hours of principals' time to an automated assignment process. And 4, taking student assignment to consumers through a student assignment bus. That shows progress, but as was stated in the work session, there's still a lot to do. The improvement, transparency, and accessibility of our student assignment process are a critical strategic priority. There is much work to do to ensure that every student and family have equal access to the process, to choice, and that experience is positive and fair and perceived by our families as such. We are not asking for your approval tonight for student assignments changes. Instead, item 5P, or VP, incorporates previously approved board changes into a written student assignment document. At the last meeting, the board approved the final 2015 JCPS legislative agenda. As promised, there's a contract on the consent agenda for legislative services being presented for your approval for McCarthy Strategic Solutions, LLC. Background information for this firm was presented to you in the Friday update. This is only a 6.5-month contract. The intent is to do an RFP at the end of the contract period. And finally, on my section of the remarks, on November 25th, 2013, you approved $21,525 for Jefferson County Public Schools portion of the Adequacy for Excellence in Kentucky funding study. At the board meeting tonight, Dr. Getz, Senior Associate of Pecos, Oden and Associates, will present a broad overview of this independent review. This reports about a research-based model of what would need to be in place to have every child reach proficiency. This is intended as an overview of the basis rationale for this study, which was released last week. It is important that our board and the citizens of Jefferson County have the context for the statewide discussion.
A request for proposal was issued for external and internal auditing services and resulted in the following. Strothman and Company, PSC, as the best evaluated vendor based on the evaluation criteria for the annual financial statement audit, including school activity funds for the period of April 1st, 2015 to March 30th, 2016. This is for the FY15 financial audit. Dean Dorton Allen Ford, PLLC, as the best evaluated vendor based on the evaluation criteria for internal audit services for the period of December 16th, 2014 to June 30, 2015. This is the group that will functionally report to the board and will maintain independence from management. Both contracts have up to 5 annual renewals options by the Board of Education. This is also in response to the state auditor's recommendations.
The board has previously approved a streamlined and focused strategic plan, Vision 2015. At the board meeting tonight, you are receiving a revision of the CDIP, Comprehensive District Improvement Plan, to align with that focused plan. It includes specific action steps that are being taken to achieve the strategic goals and priorities of our district. They should look very familiar. Schools, you remember, each have a similar CSIP, or Comprehensive School Improvement Plan, that guides their work.
The Teaching, Empowering, Leading, and Learning Survey is an externally validated and nationally recognized survey. The survey is administered to school staffs statewide every 2 years. It was done in 2011, 2013, and will again be administered in March of 2015. 2013 results were reported to the board at a work session on July 8th, 2013, and at the regular meeting on September 9th, 2013. A copy of those results is available on the website and is in your packets for your convenience. Again, the survey will be re-administered in the spring.
The Communications Department continues to work toward developing a new state-of-the-art and more user-friendly website for the district. We have an estimate from a firm under state contract. The selection of that firm would not require an RFP. However, before making our final recommendation to the board, we want to take a closer look at other options. Therefore, we hope to issue an RFP to qualified website developers before the end of the year. After presentations, our goal is to submit a contract to you in early 2015.
The Take What You Can Tote Clothing Drive, a partnership between JCPS 15 District, Parent Teacher Association Clothing Assistance Program, CAP, and Louisville Metro Government's Office of Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods, provided clothes to approximately 450 families and 1,800 people on Saturday. Families in need of winter coats and other clothing were invited to shop at no cost at the CAP headquarters. We gave each family 6 large bags to fill with any items they needed. The drive will continue this Saturday, December 20th, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. at the CAP headquarters at 319 South 15th Street. We are very thankful for Mayor Greg Fisher for his support, to all of those who volunteered, and our generous community for the donations that made the events possible. Chair Porter, at this time, on behalf of Dr. Hargins and the Cabinet, we recommend the consent calendar for the board's consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. There are no tie bids this evening. We do have a speaker before we go through the consent calendar. And at this time, I will call Mr. Chris Harmer up, and then I will ask if there are items to be pulled down from the consent calendar. Thank you for being here tonight. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes to address the board. At the end of 2.5 minutes, a bell will sound once. You will have 30 seconds to finish your statement. At the end of 3 minutes, the bell will sound twice, indicating that your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Harmer, for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. And before I start, let me also thank Ms. Haddad and Ms. Westland. And I'm glad you're going to be involved continuing in early childhood education, a critical area, and you really spearheaded that. And Ms. Westland, I suspect we'll see each other in Frankfurt, so I'll move on. I'm here to ask you to take item O off of the consent calendar. This is the district improvement plan that Dr. Hensley spoke of. There is one objective here, proficiency gaps K-12 in reading and math performance, increase the average combined reading and math proficiency ratings for all students in the non-duplicated gap group from 34% in 2014 to 51.2 in 2015. I think it's very important that this not be rubber stamped, frankly. That is, the 34% number was 10% below this year's goal, and so this number, the 51.2, really represents just going with the state's goal. It doesn't represent a number that you have, that we have seen presented any evidence that they can succeed at that, and that's demoralizing. And you don't, I think, as a board, want to be allowing goals to go forward when you know your people cannot succeed at them as good leaders here. This is a 50% jump in proficiency for GAP students, and we've struggled to see more than about 10% a year change in that number. More importantly, when we were looking at this data, you'll see this is the raw data from the state, and for elementary school and middle school, the gap groups, all of them increased, and that's tremendous and should be celebrated, was celebrated. High school dropped off a bit, but the key thing here is that the state standard is in terms of increasing proficiency of the gap group. That does not mean it's decreasing the gap. When we went in and looked at all of these increases compared to the non-Hispanic white student population, the graphs on the right are the actual gap itself, and that really hasn't changed that much. In fact, it actually went up a little bit in the elementary and middle schools over the time period. So I would like you to start the discussion on this, not finish it here obviously, but it seems to me in addition to the state goal, we need a JCPS standard a numeric standard to reduce the gaps themselves so that you aren't chasing each other here. The key here is that will drive a different behavior and a different balance in your resources. They aren't mutually exclusive at all, but we can't allow kids to graduate high school with the same gap for a social identity that they started out with. If you do that, then JCPS really owns that piece of racial inequity, and I don't think anyone on the board wants that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here tonight. At this time, are there items to be pulled down for the consent calendar for further discussion? Mr. Brady?
Item G.
G as in George.
Yes.
Ms. Duncan?
K and O.
What part of K, Ms. Duncan?
I just wanted to recognize 1, 4, 5, and 9.
1, 4, 5, and 9.
Right.
And then the other item that you pulled down was
O.
O. Mr. Jones.
O.
Any others? Okay, we'll start with item G, which is the approval of bid tabulations, contract renewals, and amendments. Mr. Brady?
Madam Chair, I request that we vote on this item separately from the consent agenda. I have a particular issue of Part A of this particular contract. Strothman and Company have done a great job for us in the past, but my concern is that we need a different audit company to take a look at our finances because they've been doing it for a number of years. It is not a best practice for organizations to continually to use the same audit company year after year.
Okay. Any response to that, Ms. Hard?
We issued an RFP, and Strothman responded, as well as 5 other organizations. And they were evaluated based on the criteria within the RFP. When the cost came through, that was one of the items in the evaluation, that Strothman's price actually was $47,000 less than any of the other companies. That $47,000 allowed us the opportunity to put those funds towards Part B, so that for internal audit services, we would be able to stay within our budget. One of the items that we can do with Strothman, they have 2 managing partners, and if it is satisfactory to the board, which is common practice within CPA firms, is to change the partners, the managing partner on a particular engagement. Bill Carroll has been the individual that has been the managing partner for Jefferson County Public Schools, and I'm sure they would be receptive if it makes the board feel more comfortable with this choice to actually change partners, which would be Bill Meyer, who is one of their managing partners. In the case of sending the RFP out, we did not tell Strothman that they were not eligible to bid on this RFP. They were actually the highest rated on both parts, And we did give them the option of which part they wanted, which is something we put in the RFP. The RFP stated that if the company came the highest on both of the items, Part A and B, we would give that organization the opportunity to choose which part they wanted. And Strothman chose to continue with the external audit firm. I will also mention Strothman and Company is a CPA firm that the Kentucky Department of Education contacts on a regular basis for input when it comes to the auditing services that are needed within the district. So they are highly respected throughout the state of Kentucky for school district audits.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brady.
One mention about that. Again, I think Strothman and Company is a fine organization. My concern lies with the fact of getting a fresh set of eyes on our finances, and that's where my best practice concerns comes from. So even though they are a great company, and I'm not saying anything against them as a company, I want to be very clear on that. It's just that my concern is that we should have a fresh set of eyes on our finances, and my concern still stands.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to K. And under K, Ms. Duncan will start with number 1, acceptance of donations and small grants.
Yes, you know, I just was so appreciative of the number of donations or the amounts of donations that are coming in to our schools at this time. And I just wanted to take a minute to recognize and thank these organizations. We had Raytheon, UPS, and Yum Brands giving support to Hazelwood, Slaughter, Shawnee, and 6 high schools that Yum supports to the tune of $112,216. And though I don't have it, what that money is going for, the support is huge coming from these organizations. And TAP is receiving $227,900 from the Kentucky State Legislature. And I know Larry Clark has led that move to get support for the SMART program at TAP, which supports the technology that the students use in post-secondary pursuits. Also want to thank the Jimmy Johnson Foundation, $48,000 to Olmsted North, which was also to upgrade their technology at that school. And then thanks to Verizon with an $80,000 contribution to 3 middle schools. And then it was to help those schools begin mobile applications programs, trying to use cell phones and the technology that we have there to impact positively the learning of the students. So just sizable donations coming in, and there were more than that, but I just wanted to hit those main ones, and just to make sure that we recognize that we can't do this alone, and these companies coming in and providing that kind of support is just hugely appreciated.
Okay, so if I heard correctly, we have taken care of K, 1, 4, 5, and 9. Is that includes the list, Ms. Duncan?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item O, Mr. Jones first, and then Ms. Duncan.
Thank you. I would like to ask, I don't know whether it's Dr. Hensley or Dr. Marshall, but I would like to ask one of you to respond to Mr. Harmer's comments about the state gap goal and the question of whether it is a realistically achievable goal. I think one of the context for me about this is that when we report our performance against the state goal, we've been very pleased to see steady increase, but it tends to take on kind of a magic number quality to me. As long as the averages are moving in the right direction overall, we don't really have enough time to drill down into all the component parts, and this is an important part. I wonder if you could just say, at a high level way, is it a realistic goal, and why does setting it where the state sets it enable us to improve our outcomes?
Well, yes, sir, I do think it's a realistic goal. I believe that even though we haven't in the past met those state targets when Kentucky shifted to the annual measurable objective, that those targets became realistic, and it's aligned with what we need to do in order to meet the AMO. So it aligns that well. But we've had such a shift in how we look at the achievement gap, both at the state level and particularly here in JCPS, where we're really looking at each child, where schools are shifting their resources, everything they can to close what I've said before, name and claim kids. That's not just a phrase. There's a process that goes with that phrase that aligns PLCs toward naming kids, connecting them to the standards that they are able to master and they're not able to master, and then putting their resources flexibly toward those kids. What that's done, I believe, is accelerate our closing of the achievement gap, while at the same time really just targeting the needs of individual students. So as teachers master the professional learning community better, as we learn more and more differentiation strategies, which we've put in place this year, where we've trained teachers, done follow-ups inside their schools to try to help them learn how to differentiate for each student, I believe those goals and closing the achievement gap becomes more concrete, less abstract, where those numbers become targets that, sure, the schools look at, but really they're looking more at individual targets for individual kids and what each student needs in order to cross that proficiency line. So I'm certainly considerate and respect what Mr. Harmer has to say about those numbers, but I believe in our kids, I believe in our teachers, I believe that we have the ability to get to close the achievement gap, what we call the opportunity gap for kids, because our teachers continue to get stronger, our administrators are growing and getting stronger, and our overall structure of PLCs is getting stronger. So the last thing I would want to do is generally the idea isn't to lower the roof, it's to build better ladders. So that's what we're attempting to do.
Thank you.
Mr. Marshall?
Just to kind of jump in on what Dewey mentioned, I think the goals are set and we're ambitious enough, and if you look at the data, we are making climbs, but as Dewey said, as we get more intentional about how we train teachers and the high expectations for all students, no one is going to be able to not achieve. And the training that Dr. Hensley has put forth with the DIP and looking at equity through a very rigorous lens and an honest lens, and what students are we missing, and Mr. Harmer put them out there. If you talk to a lot of the teachers, and we just attended a PLC round, it's very different. They are talking specifically about how is Dewey going to get across the achievement line with true strategies and research-based approaches on how to do it. So I think it is ambitious, but I definitely think it is achievable. And if we stick with the pace and even pick up the pace a little bit, we should be right on time with making those scores.
Okay. Glad to hear you're signing up for it. That's great.
Ms. Duncan?
You know, the CDIP is one of those things that we look at once a year, and then we kind of not touch base with it specifically until toward the end of the year again, a year later, and then again we see what our goals and things are. And I just wanted to list some watch fors for us, so that these are my version, my simple version of this CDIP that we can watch for and maybe keep track of as we move through our meetings over the next year. But one thing I think we want to watch for is the number of students who are achieving ACT benchmarks and career certifications. We can track that all year long. We know schools are giving programs. Southern's giving a program next week recognizing these two things. So I know that's something that we need to keep track of over the year. We want to see fewer dropouts, and that's in relation to our graduation rate. We want to see our gap kids progressing faster than the regular students, because that's what he's talking about, trying to actually close gaps. We want to see them progressing faster. We want to see parent participation in that K-Ready. The 4 K-Ready events, I think, were listed in there. We want to see how many parents took part in these K-Ready events and how we contacted those parents. So that's a watch for me. I think our measure of parent involvement is kind of strange. We use parent satisfaction as our measure of parent involvement. And to me, I'm not interested in that part as much as I'm interested in how many parents are actually tuning in to Parent Portal. Because Parent Portal, and as we get better, as our teachers get better at Parent Portal, that's the communication tool to let parents know, and they can have the luxury of checking almost daily on what their kids are doing. But that's the tool that we need to be seeing more involvement from parents with. And so I'm going to be asking about that one rather than the parent satisfaction survey, which comes at a different time. More positive stories. We're going to be looking for and watching for more positive stories getting covered in the media. We're going to look for less use of SRTs. And I say less use of SRTs because if we're doing PPAS right, if we're doing our SRTs right, if all that's happening in the way it's supposed to, then we should be using those less because kids are learning how to cooperate and behave and be compliant in the ways that we need for them to do to enhance learning in buildings. So I'm looking for less use of SRTs and how we're tracking that. That's why I say this is Linda's version of the CDIP, but it's the things that I'm going to be asking about, and I hope that we get these down and can keep track of them. One other thing that I find very strange, we want to keep everything in proportion to the percent a population represents in the school, because we are constantly accused of being disproportionate there. So apparently, we want to see everything kept in proportion to the percent of population represents within the school. And I think if you look in terms of all that affects within a school, you can begin to see how that's not very realistic. But yet, that's in here. And that's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to be watching for. How all of that is proportional. Everything is supposed to be proportional to the percent the population represents in a school. So I'm going to be watching that, and that's what I think we all ought to be tuned into. And those are that's my interpretation of the things to watch for from the CDIP, and hope that we can keep track of that throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Westland?
Just a quick comment. As Dr. Hensley and Mr. Marshall were talking about the work and the priorities that are behind the improvement plan, I just wanted to say that I have seen all that happening just the last couple of years. And I know people have always been intentional about helping kids, but it's so laser-like and so specific. Recently, I've been trying to get around to most schools in my district, at least in the past several months, at some event. And I was at an elementary school with a new principal, and I was asking him, because we'd had some discipline issues and, things like that. He said, not really any problems. He said, I've got about 10 kids I have to watch. Knew their names, knew everything about them. They all had a mentor. And then I saw the room where the teachers are meeting in PLCs, and they're talking about individual kids. It's so intentional, and it's so focused on individual children, not just how the school is doing, and we can mask this group because we've got enough of this group. It's everybody, and that's what's making the difference. And that's what makes me comfortable with the improvement plan is that we really rely on educators to tell us what we should do. And as long as you're being ambitious with some realism, but we got to be ambitious first for kids. And so I just wanted to say that I am seeing all of that. It's not just stuff you're saying to us. I've seen it, and that should help us feel more comfortable about approving this plan and all the other things that go with it that we approve. So thanks.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar minus item G? Mr. Jones, second. Ms. Duncan, all those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion to the consent calendar item G, the approval of bid tabulations? Mr. Jones, second. Ms. Westland, all those in favor? All those board members that are in favor except Mr. Brady. All those opposed? Mr. Brady. Okay, okay, thank you. Moving on. There are no action items this evening. There is a discussion item, and at this time, before I turn it over to the discussion topic, we have talked about the length and depth of the report, and we know that we're not doing a page by page tonight. That would be impossible. So I want to start off by saying that we will hear a broad overview, and I'll say that again, we will hear a broad overview. Everyone has Post-it notes before them. If there are questions that you don't get answered, please jot your questions down on the Post-it notes and we will get the answers back to you. Thank you for this opportunity for the broad overview, and I'm turning it over to Dr. Radowski, who will introduce our presenter.
Chair Porter, board members, I'm very pleased this evening to introduce our speaker, Dr. Michael Getz. He's a senior associate for Picus, Odin and Associates. Basically, the report that you're going to receive tonight is about the funding adequacy of Kentucky schools. It's hard to believe, but 25 years ago, the state passed CARE in 1990. There were 3 parts to CARE, if you remember. There was a governance part, there was an accountability part, and there was a finance part. And of the 3 parts, there have been changes in the governance part of the law. There's been changes in the accountability parts of the law. But the finance part, which was basically about distributing resources equally across districts, that has been done through the SEEK formula. Now with brand new standards, with core content and demanding standards, the question becomes, do we have adequate funds to meet the standards that are being expected of schools and like districts in the state. A year ago, we helped fund a study with the Council for Better Education. The Council for Better Education represents Kentucky school districts in an effort to ensure full implementation of Kentucky's constitutional commitment to our students and like common schools. So with that, Dr. Getz actually is one of the authors of the study. The study was basically conducted between December of last year and August of this year. It was released last week, and we really are honored to have Dr. Getz here to explain this important work. Michael?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I appreciate the chance to speak with you about this study. It's been the last year of my life. So about a year ago, the Council for Better Education requested an adequacy study of the Kentucky school finance system to determine the quantity of resources necessary for all students, or nearly all students, to reach proficiency. CBE specifically asked Picus, Odin, and Associates to conduct an adequacy study using the evidence-based model of adequacy. In order to understand where Kentucky fit against the rest of the nation and against similar states we first conducted a comparable states analysis. Based on demographics of similar states to Kentucky, we looked at the proficiency rates for the NAEP academic assessment, as well as the graduation rates. These are the states that are comparable to Kentucky amongst these demographic areas that we utilized. And in comparing them, interestingly, we found that you're right smack dab in the middle of them as far as your level of proficiency in NAEP, as well as your expenditures per pupil. You're at about average or slightly above average in teacher salaries. Now, finding this information less than useful for our study, we then went ahead and said, well, we're not just interested in what states just like us are doing, but instead we also want to know how Kentucky compares to high-performing states. So weighting performance levels much more than other characteristics, we compared Kentucky to these high-performing states. We found what we expected, and that is that Kentucky spends less per pupil than these states, except for Kansas, have lower teacher salaries than these states, except for Kansas, and has NAEP scores lower than these comparative states. So this gave us a reason to look at, well, if we want to be similar to these states in proficiency, let's take a look at the expenditures per pupil that currently exist in Kentucky. Now, there are several ways to determine adequacy or the level of resources necessary. And the four are listed on in this presentation. Now, the last one is the one we used predominantly, the evidence-based approach to adequacy. We have done every approach this company has, but we find the evidence-based approach, which two of the authors, Lawrence Pikus and Alan Odden, developed about 12 years ago. And what's different about this approach is that it begins with the evidence that exists in the literature. So what we do is we want to start from nothing and build schools. So we look at every component, every element of a school to determine, is there a basis in using whatever component that is. We'll look at research on class sizes, we'll look at research on the use of instructional facilitators, research on summer school, extended day, one-on-one tutoring, guidance counselors, pupil support personnel, etc. And when we look at this evidence, all of this evidence, we pretty much have a hierarchy of what we believe. And the hierarchy is listed in order in this presentation. We first look for the gold standard of research, those that use randomized trials to control for selection bias, to make sure that we have a clear picture of an intervention actually improving student academic growth. When this doesn't exist, we look towards longitudinal observational studies or meta-analyses, which give very strong correlations between an intervention, such as class size, and student performance. If that doesn't exist, we then look towards best practices from comprehensive school reforms or best practices from case studies in whether it be Kentucky or elsewhere. And lastly, we'll look towards accreditation processes of national organizations that represent staffing. This would be the case, for example, with nursing staff that are in our schools. Now, you do have Report 1 and Report 2, and I am not going to go into great detail today on that, but I will mention that in Report 1, there is a table 4.1, and in Report 2, there's a table 1.1, and both of these tables, which are the same, detail the different elements, the components that we use to build the schools. And you'll see ratios for prototypical elementary, middle, and high school. The elements that we feel, when put into these schools, will produce the proficiency that you would like, including, when you look at the second table following the first table, including the extra resources necessary for struggling students. Essentially, this is our quote-unquote antidote to the gap. Now, I mentioned that we build schools. Well, we literally did build schools. We built every school in the state of Kentucky using evidence. And a model, along with these reports, will be available to you in the next few days on the Council for Better Education website, where you can take a look at every single school in the state of Kentucky and how the evidence-based model would resource that school. So as you can see, it will tell you the core content, number of core content teachers, the number of specialist teachers, the number of pupil support personnel, the supplies, the special education resources, the low-income student resources, which would be tutors, extended day, summer school, etc. The resources for English language learners and any small adjustments that might occur. So we have this for every school. And then what we do is we roll up all of those school-based resources to the district level. So in the example of Jefferson County Public Schools, we'll have all of those school-based resources or school-level resources, and we'll add in district-level resources such as a central office, which we have a model for central office, a maintenance and operation, we have a model for that, and then several components that we do not attempt to model, such as transportation, debt service, food service, facilities. In those cases, we just carry over what was previously spent the year before, what we call a carryover, because we do not have a model for it. It does not mean it's adequately resourced, it's just that we didn't model it. So when we do that, in the case of Jefferson County Public Schools, what we find is, when we compare it to SEEK expenditures, is that in 2012 to 13, to implement our model, if we eradicate what you have now and just put in place our model, we would need an additional $200 million in the district for 1 year, and that year is 2012-13. So any given year would be different, but that's what this model is based upon. And we have those data for every single district, of course, in the state of Kentucky. And the $200 million is broken down into the different components so that you can itemize where you would be using resources based on our model. Now, I will mention that in no way, shape, or form is this a mandate on how to staff a school or a district. It is a rationale by which you resource schools and districts, or the state as a whole. And we did roll up all the districts into the state. And for the state to replace its current system with the evidence-based model, we would need up to $2.4 billion in addition to the roughly $7 billion currently spent in the state of Kentucky. Now that assumes that everything that you see in tables 1, 2, 3, and 4, that you agree with those. The good thing about the evidence-based approach is that if you have an argument with any given component or ratio that is used, you can turn to the evidence that we use to support that to determine whether you agree with it or not, and whether we should be adding more evidence. Now, in order to do this, not only did we look at the evidence that is available, we also had an advisory committee, which is in both reports, that gave us advice on how the evidence would fit into Kentucky's system. These were educational leaders from across the state who met with me and others 4 days for full-day sessions in which we went line by line through the model to determine whether it would meet Kentucky's needs and whether they believed that it would help students gain proficiency. Knowing that that advisory committee does not necessarily represent the entire state, we tried to further our understanding of the state by going to 3 different places, Madisonville, Hazard, and Louisville, where we held full-day, what we call stakeholder panels, in which we discussed with primarily teachers and some business officials what they thought of the model and whether they thought we should be resourcing in some other way. So all of that information was gathered together to determine what exists in these reports. And then I have the simple job of costing each of those components out and building the spreadsheet that, again, will be available to you and the entire state, of course. So the assumptions are, first of all of the evidence. But I wanted to mention a couple that have drastic effects on the cost of this model, which is why when the Council for Better Education talks about this model and when we discuss this model, we say that it could cost up to $2.4 billion. That's because the advisory committee recommended certain fundamental changes to the system as it is. And those include, for example, that we have full day pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, universal. That is a hefty price tag, but that is embedded in the model. So is the use of free and reduced price lunch students instead of free priced students, lunch students, which drastically increases your low income population in the model, and therefore drastically changes the cost of the model because of the resources we have expended towards low income students in order to close the gap. Another fundamental change was that we switched to average daily membership from average daily attendance or adjusted average daily attendance, which essentially means you gain a bunch of students that you weren't accounted for before in the SEEK formula. A fourth model assumption is the use of a comparable wage index, which could take 8 hours to explain, so I'm not going to, other than to say it adjusts the salaries of personnel in the model based on the region in which we're employing them. And lastly, we have full day kindergarten and 100% participation of kindergarten in the model. All of these can be changed. It takes 1 minute for me to change any ratio, any assumption in this model, and it will propagate the entire 50 or so Excel sheets that are used to develop this model. And therefore you can also change many different assumptions and they will all interact with one another at the same time. This is particularly useful when we go in front of the legislature, when they can make drastic changes like, oh, we want this ratio, or we do not want to switch to ADM, get it back to ADA for counts, and we can do that, and we can immediately tell them that's a $150 million savings, something to that effect. Now, this was released last week at the KASS meeting, and the superintendent spent some time discussing what is the priorities that they've found came out of these reports and out of our study. Essentially, what they feel are the most important components that we used that they should be advocating for. And they chose the top 3 that are listed in this presentation. Instructional coaches that would help embed professional development in the classroom. Certified teacher tutors, meaning certified individuals who tutor students one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-three, and universal pre-K programs. Now, these happen to be the 3 components with the highest amount of evidence that supports these interventions to increase student performance. The 4th also has pretty great evidence to support its implementation, class size reduction, but it is costly and it may require interaction with facilities costs because if you lower class sizes to 15 to 1 in grades pre-K through 3rd grade, you may be talking about a space issue. So that was 4th on their agenda. The 5th and 6th I've added extended day programs and summer school programs, which have mixed research on effectiveness, probably because of the quality of the programs as well as the quality of the studies that determine their impact. But I've added them here because they are of interest, because they are specifically geared towards essentially your GAP students. So they should be also taken into consideration according to superintendents and according to our research. So I hope that was high level enough for you. I know I can go into great detail about any of these things, but again, that's not the purpose of this time, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about our study.
Thank you for your presentation and reminding the board that this is a broad overview, and our Christmas gift to each other is to keep this a broad overview. Having said that, if there are questions, each board member may ask 1 question, and the rest of them will be reserved for answers at a later time. So who would like to start with the questions? Mr. Jones, and we'll go down the row. Thank you for your presentation.
So compliments on a great summary of a lot of data. That was a good presentation. Could you translate the big numbers into head count on a kind of a rough basis? So for JCPS, probably most of the money would be going into more people, more teachers and others. What's sort of the scale of that?
That is a wonderful question. And let me say this, that I've been contracted by JCPS to answer that question within a month as part of the budget process. I will be comparing directly your current research, your expected resource use in 2015-16 compared to what we would expect the evidence-based model to resource your schools and your district. So I'll have a very specific answer about even more than you've asked within the month.
So would it be fair at a high level, $200 million in addition to 1.3 billion, but really 200 million is, if you're excluding facilities and transportation and all that other stuff, 200 million is sort of part of the operating budget, which is about 900 to $1 billion, of which 700, Cordelia, I'm looking at you, about 700 is spent on people, is that right? Something like that? So it's maybe $150 million on top of 700 million. So we're really talking about a very significant increase in the number of, in the number of adults to work with children to get everyone to the goal. Is that?
I'll answer that in 2 ways.
Yeah.
The first is yes, it would be an increase in staff. But the second answer is this study did not determine your current staffing and then switch it over to the staffing recommended in the model. It eradicated all of your staff and then built it back up exactly as the evidence-based model suggests it should be. Meaning that you could have 2 times, well, you couldn't, you could have a lot more staff than what's in this model. They're just not in the same places as this model. If you were, for example, if you were to implement this model in absolute terms, it would mean you'd need to redistribute a great deal of your resources, staffing and dollars, to fit into the model that's here. So it's a different question than, well, if we wanted to implement certain components, how much more would we need? Which is what I'll be answering over the course of the next month. Thank you. You're welcome.
Ms. Westland.
Thinking about how to ask 2 questions in one sentence. I'll try to keep it.
Conjunctions.
I think they're related, but you can answer these quickly. In looking at the model for a school, and you looked at Kentucky, and you looked at what the adequate funding would be if we tried to hit a higher proficiency mark, right? Was there, and I see all the additional things that would be needed based on your study. Was there any area in Kentucky that the group thought was significantly underfunded at this point? Obviously, we don't have full-day kindergarten. We know that.
Yeah.
We know we don't have the pre-K.
Right.
But is there something that's going on? I didn't analyze all the staffing where you think it might be weak here or there. Was there a weakness that might be an immediate something to look at?
Again, I'll have a complete answer for that in a month. But
just what do you
just
think
from
discussions kind of thing?
From discussions, what I've seen is that let me put it this way, that the school districts overall have dedicated few resources to tutoring struggling students, but have started gearing up instructional facilitators or goal clarity coaches. So that's just what I've seen as a priority. Whereas what we've seen is as far as the research is concerned, is one-on-one and one-on-two and one-on-three tutoring by a certified teacher is by far the way to increase student learning, especially for students from low-income ELL and special education populations. So I would say that's lacking. But the costly items are going to be pre-K and full day K. Tutoring, and I'll know more about Jefferson County Public Schools in a month, but from what I've seen in every state and every district, that more instructional facilitators will be needed.
Okay.
Mr. Hathaway.
Help me understand the use of the ADM over the AADA, please.
Why do we do that?
Yes.
First, because it's the norm. That doesn't really give evidence towards it. But essentially, it's the recognition that a school needs to staff itself for the quantity of students that could possibly be in the school at any given time, which would be the membership. As opposed to average daily attendance, which of course is based on an average number, the average attendance over a certain number of days. Now, the reason given for using average daily attendance is it is a mechanism by which a state can push districts to have a focus on having having students come to school. I would suggest that there are other ways to do that, as well as there is some research that suggests that use of average daily attendance negatively affects schools with large low-income populations more than schools without low-income populations, which makes sense for health reasons, for a variety of reasons that occurs. So that's a questionable situation, I think, which is why most states have moved over to average daily membership.
Ms. Duncan, did the states that you use as high performing fund this way? Fund the way
Let me
that
cheat and go back to them. New Jersey partially does, because they were based on Alan Odden's work a decade ago that is fundamental to the way the evidence-based approach was created. But the two states in which have taken our model exactly as introduced to them and funds based on it include Wyoming and Arkansas, some of Washington State's, and some of Ohio's. Those actually have this model in law. The first two have it in law as a mechanism to resource districts. It doesn't mandate the use of resources this way. And what we found, if you don't mandate resources, they typically are not, schools and districts typically do not staff them in the way in which is the basis for their funding. It's only when these states mandated the use of dollars in a certain way. For example, with Wyoming, it was instructional facilitators. The district could only get money if it used it for instructional facilitators. There we saw instructional facilitators. We didn't see any tutors. In Wyoming, in Arkansas, nothing was mandated, and in no way were the schools fitting the model. But studies have been done via our model in Vermont and New Jersey, as well as 10 other states, but not on this list.
Ms. Haddad.
Yeah. I don't have a question. I'm glad to see the pre-K in there, that they're really seriously looking at that. Yeah, because I think it needs to have more conversation about it. Because as we're looking through all the things that we're doing, we're finding that if we get the younger we can get them, the better it's going to be. And it does cost in the beginning, but then it helps remediation in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be worthwhile for the district to look at that at early childhood, and then that would cost them, keep from the tutoring that you're talking about. Maybe that would cut down on the cost for that.
Right, and just to expand on your point, there's a whole theory of action built in this model, which ends at special education. It begins with struggling students, ends at special education. And the belief is that if you start early in pre-K with a highly qualified teacher and all resources necessary to educate that student, that by that time you hit kindergarten, you are kindergarten ready, first off. But also you then start into all of these extra help strategies of tutoring, of extended day programs and summer school programs. And of course you're going to have instructional facilitators constantly professionally developing teachers at this point. So that whole package essentially, if you think of the RTI process, you're keeping people out of the echelons where they need more and more assistance in later grades.
Mm-hmm.
So what you'd expect is that the special education population, for example, would shrink because you're getting students earlier and you're getting them up to speed earlier. But your comment also made me think of another assumption in this model, and when I say that up to $2.4 billion, this is excluding federal resources. So every number that you're seeing in these reports excludes federal. Federal money just comes on top of it. And that's because adequacy at least according to law, adequacy is a state prerogative, meaning it is the state's responsibility to ensure adequacy, just like equity, from local and state resources. So federal is left out of the situation.
And the model that you did is altogether different than what they did in 1990, when they were looking at the adequacy, right? You know, when the first lawsuit was
right.
filed.
Although Lawrence Pikus and Al-Anon were a part of that, they had not started the evidence-based model at that point. Equity was the key ingredient of the SEEK formula and the CARA implementation, and we did do an equity study or I did an equity study of Kentucky as part of this project, but it showed that you continue to be near equitable, meaning equitable enough. You're always going to have outliers, of course, and we could name those districts right now.
Yeah.
You're always going to have outliers, but as far as reasonable equity, you still have it, especially with the influx of money this previous year. The adequacy model it pretty much ensures equity, at least in the short term, because you're essentially bringing all low spending districts up, which improves equity, and you have what's called vertical equity. You're giving the money to the right student. You know, some students are going to cost $200,000. That's just the way it is given multiple handicapped students. And some will only need $6,000 to get to proficiency. That's just the way it is, which is why you have additional resources for struggling students, usually based on low-income populations. You're always going to have wide gaps in spending, and some of them are absolutely necessary, and some of them cause inequities.
Thank
right?
you.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you. Lots of good questions being asked. Going to slide 14, kind of going back to one of my fallback questions. Regarding the effective states regarding education, Kansas is the outlier. So I'd like to know what's up with Kansas. So is there something that they're doing that could be replicated here in Kentucky, or is there just they're facing a different type of student population or don't have different challenges, or is there a reason why?
They're fairly similar. However, they're more homogeneous, and I would stop at that. I don't think there's any silver bullet that you're going to find in Kansas. But we can do another paper on that.
So do you, in short, think they're just not facing the same type of challenges that Kentucky would be chasing, or facing rather?
You know, there's an ongoing debate in school finance, and that is whether money matters. And when it comes down to it, money matters only in that money matters because it purchases the programs that do matter. Meaning it's not how much money you have, but how you're using money that matters, which is why we base all of this on evidence at the programmatic level. So you will find very different uses of the educational dollar across states, across districts, and across schools. So in Kentucky, I would suggest that, and the superintendents agreed that what every district needs to do and every school needs to do is determine what they feel, hopefully based on evidence, what they feel is the best way to increase student academic growth and implement it. In that way, the money will matter. So in Kansas, it could be that they have one fewer student per classroom. We don't know. It would have to be randomly studied to determine why it's actually occurring. There's not much we can deal with correlational work between Kansas and Kentucky to determine why they can spend less and achieve more.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your report. If there are additional questions that we did not get to, would you see to it that Dr. Radowski gets those post-it notes, and we will work to get your questions answered. And it sounds like that we will hear from you again because you're doing some additional work for us. Thank you for keeping it a broad overview. For those of you that thought it could not be done, it was done very well. So thank you very much for helping us with this presentation. Thank you, Dr. Radowski and Jonathan, everyone that pulled together to make it as concise as possible and as understandable as possible. So we appreciate your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to receive the report? Mr. Jones, second, Ms. Haddad. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the discussion agenda planning calendar 2014-15. Mr. Brady.
I do have one request. Within the last year or so from Academic Services, we've looked at the grading scale that we have for our students, and I had asked a question as to what the pros and cons were to going to a 10-point scale. I know some of our neighboring districts have gone to a 10-point scale. Some concerns about that, that they were helping, or those students are more eligible to have, or increases their eligibility for scholarships and achievement and the like. And I'd like to know when we can expect to see that report or that discussion come back before the board.
Okay, we'll see to it that it gets, that information gets back to the superintendent. Anything else for the discussion agenda planning calendar? Ms. Duncan?
I'd like to see a couple things added. And one is the an annual report on the claims that that are filed against the district or that we wind up paying that we don't normally see. I would like to see that as an annual report. And also, I think given the changes that we've made with transition centers and some things we're trying to do to keep kids in school, I want to see how we track unexcused absences and how that compares now to the past few years. Are we seeing any difference in unexcused absences? Because pressure has to be let out somewhere on some of these things, and I have a feeling it might be an area where it's let out. So I think we need to watch unexcused absences, and we need to track the claims.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for the agenda planning calendar? Is there a motion to receive the, I'm sorry.
One more thing, on the program reviews, I haven't seen what we're going to do. Is there, have you all talked about when we can have some discussion about around program reviews?
Can I just give that to the superintendent and let her get back with us?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Is there a motion to receive the planning calendar? Ms. Haddad, second. Mr. Brady. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much. We have, moving on to board reports and requests. And also to let you know, we have one speaker tonight. So moving on to board reports and requests. Mr. Moffitt, Tom Moffitt is here to address the board. Mr. Moffitt, you have 3 minutes to address the board. After 2.5 minutes, the bell will sound once. Then you will have 30 seconds to finish your statement. At the end of 3 minutes, the bell will sound twice, indicating your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Moffitt, for being here tonight.
I have to say thank you to Mrs. Haddad and Mrs. Westman. Thank you for your service. I'm here because of the story in the paper this morning about the crash program to take care of the 16 to 8-year-olds who have dropped out. I don't know a thing about, I mean, that just seems like a almost impossible task when they're that old and they've already dropped out. I'm amazed that you have so many ideas about how to deal with it. But I couldn't help, all the way through reading that story, say, we have got to start earlier. I know I've said this before, but that was my concern all the way as I was reading that. Why do we have to do this? We know if a student is falling behind at the 3rd grade, that they're in grave danger of not graduating. We can't afford to pay those costs. We can't afford to increase our efforts and our effectiveness in preschool, kindergarten, and the first 3 grades. We'll save gobs of money after that if we do it first. I'm not an expert, but I think Mr. Gibbs was saying start early and start with those that have the most problems. That will benefit the others too, because as they're going through their classes, the teachers will be able to pay more attention to the capable students, because the ones that are having more difficulty won't be as much of a problem. It's a win-win situation if you put more money, and goodness knows it's hard to find money, but just let me encourage you to make this your priority. Day in and day out, we need to put more effort, more targeted effort into those that have serious problems and into those early years. I don't know how you can do it, but I know it can be done.
Thank you, Mr. Moffitt. Appreciate your remarks. I want to go back because I don't think I really asked for board reports and requests. We got information for the agenda planning calendar, so forgive me. Let's go back to board reports and requests. Are there items for board reports and requests? Mr. Brady.
Just more of a report, and my report, I guess, is that I just want to say thank you to my colleagues, Debbie and Carol, for all of your time and your service here. Debbie, you've brought a great elegance and passion to this board. And Carol, I just want to just thank you for all of your wisdom and the legacy that you're going to leave here. Both of you all we've sorely missed, and I'm so glad that I've had the privilege of serving alongside of you and getting to know you. And I don't want to start a tidal wave of congratulations here, but I do want to say that publicly, and you're going to be very sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Ms. Duncan?
Well, I wanted to say something a while ago, but it doesn't feel right. The way we were moving people around and all, it didn't feel right. But I did want to say something. I mean, we are going to miss these two so much. And, with Debbie, we're going to miss her insistence on facing facts. We're going to miss her always trying to check with all the stakeholders. I mean, she comes to us with that insistence that we check with stakeholders and brings that information to us. And with Carol, with her encyclopedic knowledge of the history of JCPS, it's and the relationships that she's built with people all across the community and with the state legislators and all. I mean, I can't tell you how much this experience is going to be missed. And I said, there's only one thing I'm not going to miss, and that's the friendship, because I know we're going to continue that, and we'll continue to touch base. So yeah, I just tribute to both and appreciate so much the opportunity to serve with them.
Mr. Hadaway.
I definitely will join in. I do have a couple other things I want to share too, so if you want to come back to me after the love train goes through. So my colleagues have said it very well, but and I echo both your all sentiments, and I'm sure the ones that are yet to come. One of the things that I want to say on a personal note, both of you all have done made me feel very welcome, and you've done a lot of hand-holding for me. And the thing that I value is that both of you assured me that you're just a phone call away as well, and that means a lot to me. It really does.
So you want me to come back for the other items after the love train passes?
Yeah, it just doesn't flow
okay.
right.
Ms. Westland, did you have anything?
Yeah, I didn't say anything.
Okay, that's fine. Just checking. Mr. Jones.
Well, I echo what my colleagues have said. I want to just express the hope that Ms. Haddad does apply her tenacity to early childhood, where I think, you know, again and again and again, we've come back, focused back around on that. So, you know, in your next stage, there's a lot of work ahead. And Ms. Westland has been a great counselor. I think, Linda, what you said about keeping us focused on the facts, I'm grateful for, and also her elegant writing. Anybody who's not following her blog needs to, and I know there will be more wisdom ahead coming from there. Thank you.
Just a thank you to both board members. It's been a pleasure to serve with you, to work with you. Ms. Haddad, I think I've known you most of my life, so it's been an honor to sit on this side of the table as opposed to sitting on the other side of the table. Ms. Westland, it's been an honor to work with you. I would like to say that I think that no matter whether our opinions were the same or not, we always kept the focus on what was good for kids, and that's why we were elected, is to take care of the students of the Jefferson County Public Schools. So we know that you may not sit in the chair, but we know that your presence will always be here. So thank you for all the work that you have done with us, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
The love train is now departed.
Over.
Mr. Hadaway.
Train over.
Just a couple things I wanted to share. Last Friday, my family and I were able to attend the Wizard of Oz, the PRP Fine Arts program. We got a picture, hopefully. It made me realize again the value of arts and education. I'm a former student at YPAS. I took that shot of the production the other night. The students did a fantastic job. The value of arts, you can really see in a production like this the confidence that comes out of an individual when they get on a stage, and the constructive collaboration that the whole group does to put on a super show. And I just want to tip my hat to teacher Brent Braun for his leadership in this area. If you met Brent, you know that it is his passion to lift these students, and he has a great commitment to the Panther students there. And in an effort to ongoing, as Ms. Duncan alluded to before, when we talk about the CDIP, and telling a very positive story, sometimes you got to be intentional in finding them, and I found one today. I made a call to Bonnie Calkins, and if we go back to in the consent calendar, item VK1, there's a little byline in there, maybe a sentence or two. Schaffner Traditional Elementary School received $2,000 from Bonnie Calkins to purchase a smart board for a classroom. Well, it's always interesting to find the story behind the agenda board item, and Bonnie is a third grade teacher. She's taught for 6 years at Schaffner, and I called her on her planning period to thank her personally for the gift, and she had just told her students that she was retiring at the end of the week. So she was in a downtime, and it was good to lift her spirits again, but she bought this smart board on her own money 2 years ago, and one of her lasting gifts besides the year of love and education that she's given to those students as she's leaving it in that classroom upon her exit. And that's a story worth telling. And I know we have ripples of those within our teachers and our administrators. And I just wanted to draw a light to that story.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other, Ms. Duncan?
Well, I did have my final KSBA Board of Directors meeting, and we did discuss a legislative agenda. And to, I think, the surprise of several of us, we found that in our legislative agenda, it's been, there was the addition of the push for changing SBDM council ratios to 3 parents, 3 teachers, and 1 administrator to equalize that representation. And I don't remember that we discussed that when we were with the legislative agenda, and it was just kind of a surprise, but that was what went through. And then Dr. Holliday spoke to us and told us that the legislature was going to be coming hard at us with charter schools, and the proposal that charter schools somehow close achievement gaps. And we then had an opportunity to discuss that with him, because ordinarily the charter schools do not serve the gap kids. Those are the ones that get exited from charter schools after the money's collected, and they get exited back. And so we thought that was going to be an interesting argument that charter schools would be closing achievement gaps. And he found that was not a very welcome message that he brought to us. But that was my last meeting, and before that I had served on the nominating committee to choose the next president, who is David Webster, and the county that he's from totally eludes me. And but we had some outstanding candidates that we chose him from, and then we also chose our replacements. I mean, I know I was on the committee and chose my replacement for that. Wonderful service, 6 years of nothing but growing and listening to everything that's going on around the state. So it was just an honor to serve with KSBA for that time period. And I still will be on the advocacy team that goes to Washington in January. I still will serve that. And I hope to, Debbie will be on that trip too. Yeah, we'll be there. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few things I wanted to acknowledge. Several of us had the opportunity to be at Fern Creek High School on December the 2nd for Leadership Louisville. So I wanted to thank the board members that were able to do that. Board member Brady, Duncan, Haddad, and Westland. We visited the Leadership Louisville class, and they broke us up in small groups, and we had an opportunity to have conversation. But I think that was very meaningful. On Friday, December the 12th, I was at Wheatley Elementary School because there is something with the U of L School of Dentistry where they have dentists that come out to the school and talk to students about the importance of oral hygiene. So I brought you a sample of what they took away. This is their lunch box, lessons in the lunch box, and in this box is something about a toothbrush, toothpaste, dental floss, and a rinse cup. Special shout out to dentists Dr. Sherry Babbage, Susie Rowley, and Dr. Watson, who were there with the kids. That was very informative, so I just wanted to share that information. On Saturday, December the 13th, I was at the Clothing Assistance Program, where we had a partnership with Metro Louisville and JCPS, Take What You Can Tote. It received some coverage on the TV. We served 450 families from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. And these are families in need who may not have had Christmas, but because of the Clothing Assistance Program, they were able to come in and pick gifts, not only for their children, but for teenagers and adults in the family also. So I want to commend the district and Metro Louisville for that partnership. I think it was an exceptional program, and if you missed it, they'll be back next Saturday from 10 until 2 at the Clothing Assistance Program. We'll do a shout out saying we need volunteers to help keep the tables full for people to shop. But it was a wonderful atmosphere. It was a feeling of thankfulness. Thank you for providing this opportunity for us and to our children and to our families. It was just great to be there. Truly a feeling of the holiday spirit. So I wanted to call that out also. I would like to ask for the third time for suspension data. This is the third time I've asked for suspension data. Now I got some suspension data in the Friday update that talked about fighting, but I've asked, this is the third time for suspension data. After the last meeting, I was asked, what are you looking for? I'm looking for suspension data by school, by demographics, so that we can in fact see what the suspension data looks like and the impact of the new programs that we have implemented. Are we in fact keeping students in school? I would like to see that data, and the board would like to see that data for the district, for every district, so we get a feel for what's going on with suspensions. I would appreciate that very much. And I would like to thank all staff and say happy holidays to. Got something to say? Okay, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead. All right. I thought you were winding us up.
When we have board meetings, we see people in this room, but what we know for sure is that every day there are people that open our schools, that drive our buses, that feed our children, that teach our children, and make it possible for education, and we do not take time often enough and long enough to thank folks. So in the spirit of the holiday season, I would like to say thank you for everybody. This is not about an I, this is about we, the Jefferson County Public Schools. We cannot be successful without everyone working toward that goal. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to recognize Dr. Lisa Wildner, who is in the room, who will be joining the board in January. Thank you for being here tonight. Mr. Jones.
I just want to quickly report that on December 2nd, the 55,000 degrees update on Louisville's progress toward achieving that community goal of deeper educational achievement was released, and I had the opportunity to moderate a panel made up of representatives of U of L, Jefferson Community and Technical College, Simmons College, and our own JCPS, with Dr. Hemsley, our Chief Academic Officer, representing us. The gist of the report is we've made good progress in getting students who are college ready through the post-secondary system, but a smaller percentage are choosing to go to college of the students who JCPS successfully gets to being college ready, and the number of college ready students is still too small. So the panel that I moderated talked about what the different institutions were doing to enhance the throughput of basically to get more out of the money that is available to spend on college. And I think it's both, it's good news to report great similarity of effort. What Dr. Hensley talked about earlier when he responded to the question about can we achieve the improvement goal with the GAP students, and what our presentation about more intensive effort, more intensive tutoring, mentoring with students from high poverty, high needs backgrounds. Each part of the K-12 and post-secondary system was talking about finding resources and adding everything from sort of group, organizing groups of first-generation college goers. It was so the point there is JCPS's work, and it exists in a very rich and desperately needed community setting. So kudos to Dr. Hensley for his presentation on that, and we've all got good work ahead.
There is no need for an executive session this evening, so at this time we will accept a motion to adjourn. Ms. Haddad, second. Ms. Westland, all those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy holidays. I know you go with the kids. I've been baking a lot.